Malcolm Turnbull was Australia's 29th Prime Minister. His tenure was short-lived, being sandwiched between that of Tony Abbott and Scott Morrison. Malcolm Turnbull liked to position himself as the enlightened future of the Liberal Party, whose natural intelligence and education made him everyone's moral, intellectual and cultural superior. It must therefore have stung when Scott Morrison deposed him following a string of bad polling, and even more so when Scott Morrison snatched victory from the jaws of defeat and beat Bill Shorten in an election victory so improbable the betting agencies had actually paid out on Scott Morrison losing well in advance. This must have rubbed so much salt in Malcolm Turnbull's wounds that he became embittered, hell-bent on exacting revenge on the Liberals who failed to see his innate superiority, at least in his eyes. And so it is that Malcolm Turnbull has now heavily criticised Peter Dutton, much like he did with Scott Morrison. Malcolm Turnbull has called Peter Dutton a thug and has rued the day that Peter Dutton might become Prime Minister. Here's what Malcolm Turnbull had to say on the project.
What do you think? What sort of Prime Minister will Peter Dutton make if he wins?
I think that's something we should contemplate with dread.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Don't hold back, Malcolm. Don't hold back.
Why?
Well, he's a thug. And Peter's got one tune that he plays. I mean, and it's been all his political life, and that is division and animosity, generally targeted at immigrants. It is real. I couldn't think of anyone less suited to be Prime Minister of a multicultural society like Australia.
Now, fortunately for Peter Dutton, the project's ratings are so bad that probably not many people actually saw what Malcolm Turnbull had to say. And Malcolm Turnbull was probably just preaching to the converted. Now, of course, the Liberal Party is now thoroughly sick of Malcolm Turnbull, with many calling for his expulsion from the party. The party has thus far resisted expelling Malcolm Turnbull for fear he might then try to play the victim, much like the cry bully that Malcolm Turnbull appears to be. Peter Dutton, for his part, seemed to regard Malcolm Turnbull as inconsequential, damning him with faint praise and expressing faux pity for Malcolm Turnbull that has become so bitter that the Liberal Party lives rent-free in his head. Peter Dutton made these comments to Ray Hadley on 2GB.
How do you respond to that sort of nonsense from a former Prime Minister, a Liberal Prime Minister?
Look, Ray, to be honest, my fight at this election is going to be against Anthony Albanese because I think he's been a bad Prime Minister. I think he's getting worse, and I don't think our country can afford 3 more years of him. So that's the contest. I don't have any contest with Malcolm Turnbull. He appointed me to be the Home Affairs Minister. He was very open in private with Matthias Cormann and I and others that we were central to the success of the government. He never had a terse word or a derogatory word against me. So I just think people can see through it, and I wish him the best. I think if you look at the
Come on, you can't wish him the best. He just called you a thug. He's a two-faced hypocrite. He's a two-faced hypocrite. He sucks up to you in person when you're part of his government and then rams it up to you to the giggling gaggle of geese on the project.
I just think if you look at what Julia Gillard's done, you look at what John Howard and Tony Abbott have done, like that's the one model for former leaders. Or you can go down the sort of the Kevin Rudd, Paul Keating path, and if that's the way Malcolm's choosing, I think he diminishes himself by making these comments. But what I will say is that I think that's the nicest thing that he said about any Liberal in recent times. So relative to what he says about other Liberal Party members, I've got off scot-free. And it's also, I mean, Malcolm's a highly educated person, as he'll tell you. It's pretty sort of
doesn't mean he's smart.
It's a pretty rudimentary sort of basic comment. I thought he could have come up with something much more sophisticated than that. But anyway, look, Malcolm's got an axe to grind. I think it's sad, and I think for a former leader of our party, I want to do nothing more than sort of hold them up and praise them because they've led our party and they deserve that respect. But when you diminish yourself in this way, I just don't think it helps his legacy or his public standing, and why he'd want to do that to himself, I don't know. But look, for me, I've got tough skin, and in the end, I know the difference between right and wrong, and I know what I want to do for this country, and I want to make sure that we can win the next election, and that's really the only focus that I've got, because I do worry about the times that we're going into economically, from a security perspective, and I just don't think Anthony Albanese has a clue as to what he's doing from day to day.
Now, of course, the Liberal Party has largely rallied behind Peter Dutton. Bridget McKenzie, for example, has also backed Peter Dutton, highlighting that he has the Liberal Party's full support, which Malcolm Turnbull notably lacks and possibly never had. Here's what Bridget McKenzie had to say on Sky News.
Well, I've worked with both of these men as leaders of the Liberal Party in our leadership team, and I can tell you that Peter Dutton has a long history and track record, way before he got into Parliament, of locking up thugs, not actually being one. I'm very proud to serve with him going into the next election. I think it's really important that former Prime Ministers stay high. We've seen Julia Gillard and the way she's conducted herself post leaving the Prime Ministership as a real exemplar, carrying that authority, if you like, with her post that appointment, and into some great work overseas and here at home, serving the community. So I think former Prime Ministers should take their own advice when they are Prime Ministers. They hate it when other people tell them what they should be doing, and I think it's best for all that Malcolm and Kevin at times take a leaf out of Julia Gillard's book.
So what then do I think of this whole situation? Well, my view is we're almost at the stage where whenever Malcolm Turnbull opens his mouth, people do the opposite. Whenever Malcolm Turnbull advocates for something, we should do the opposite of what he wants us to do. Malcolm Turnbull seems to want to take an anti-LNP position on everything, simply for the sake of opposing the Liberal and National parties. This includes his backflip to go from opposing the Voice to supporting it. It appears he wants to go all in on so-called woke policies, purely for the purpose of doing so, potentially just to spite the Liberal Party, but also potentially to perhaps curry favour with his new advocates and allies, people like Simon Holmescourt, it appears, but also the Champagne Socialists in Sydney's eastern suburbs. Now, of course, Malcolm Turnbull, to my mind, also looks a little bit duplicitous in some of this support, and he's also allegedly self-interested. For example, he allegedly has financial interests in the renewable sector. Hence, he has a resistance to nuclear. This includes also cozying up to Anthony Albanese and the ALP, who would pointedly eat him alive if he were not such a useful idiot. Now, of course, we don't necessarily know Malcolm Turnbull's true motivations for backing any of these policies. Maybe he does genuinely believe in our renewable future. Maybe Malcolm Turnbull is genuinely deluded. Maybe Malcolm Turnbull genuinely wants to throw everyone else under the bus in favour of what he thinks is the enlightened approach to policy. Or maybe, on the other hand, as some have alleged, he has a financial interest. I'll leave it to you to decide what you think is the true case. You can do some research into some of Malcolm Turnbull's investments, for example. Now, Malcolm Turnbull represents a particularly repulsive part of Sydney's eastern suburbs to my mind. A subset of Sydney's east has become so wealthy and so arrogant that they are completely out of touch with the impact their policies have on everyone else. It's a group that is so wealthy that they can afford to not notice some additional government spending, some additional wastage, some additional tax. They can afford to pay for that and not notice it and not care. And therefore they expect everyone else to be willing to be shafted. They especially expect everyone else who is also wealthy but is more frugal to be willing to be shafted. And they look down upon those people as their moral inferiors, i.e. people who work hard and save their own money and make better lives for themselves and their families are somehow morally inferior to these people that are advocating for these policies like Malcolm Turnbull. The smug superciliousness of these Champagne Socialists is galling. Malcolm Turnbull is their poster child. His smirk plastered alongside that of the arrogant mug of Simon Holmescourt. Malcolm Turnbull appears to just want to burn everything to the ground, unless, of course, it has his personal stamp of approval. Now, of course, the funny thing is that it's not clear that Malcolm Turnbull's comments influence anyone. People who already hate Peter Dutton will already agree with Malcolm Turnbull, and on the project he was likely just preaching to the converted. People who liked Peter Dutton can see through Malcolm Turnbull's charade. They can see that Malcolm Turnbull is just a bitter, old politician who lacks any real relevance anymore. Unconvinced everyday people might see Malcolm Turnbull for the bitter, out-of-touch blowhard that he really is, grasping at straws for any semblance of credibility and any semblance of relevance. But it simply doesn't work, because everyone can see through it and everyone is tired of anything that Malcolm Turnbull has to say. In essence, whenever he opens his mouth, it backfires at this point. So of course, I don't think that Malcolm Turnbull has any adverse impact on Peter Dutton. Indeed, if Malcolm Turnbull doesn't like Peter Dutton, maybe that's a reason to like him. But let me know your thoughts about Malcolm Turnbull's comments and about whether we should care at all about what Malcolm Turnbull has to say. Or do you think we should just ignore him and hope that he goes away? Let me know what you think.